Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves inside a medieval city just as another ordinary day begins. Not a day that kings will record in their chronicles or that poets will celebrate in songs, but the kind of day that millions of ordinary people experienced across medieval Europe. It is a day filled with work, trade, conversation, small frustrations, familiar routines, and countless tasks that quietly keep an entire city alive. Before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now lower the lights, get comfortable, and allow yourself to drift back several centuries to a world of crowded streets, timber buildings, and hidden businesses operating behind nearly every door. You wake before sunrise in a room that feels smaller every time you open your eyes. The ceiling slopes slightly overhead, forcing taller residents to learn the valuable skill of remembering where wooden beams are located before standing up too quickly. The room contains only a handful of possessions, but this is hardly unusual. A wooden chest stands beside the wall holding most of what you own, while a simple stool occupies a corner near the window. The mattress beneath you consists of straw packed into rough fabric, and although it would never be mistaken for luxury, it serves the purpose that mattresses have served throughout history, convincing exhausted people that sleep is still possible. The city beyond your walls has already begun moving. Even before the sun appears above the rooftops, the sounds of daily life travel through the narrow streets below. A cart rolls across uneven stone somewhere in the distance, its wheels producing a rhythm that seems determined to wake every resident within hearing range. Voices drift upward from the street, softened by walls and shutters but impossible to mistake. The city never truly sleeps. It merely becomes quieter for a few hours before activity gradually resumes. As you rise and move toward the window, the cool air of the early morning reaches you through gaps in the wooden shutters. When you push them open, the view reveals a maze of rooftops stretching in every direction. Chimneys release thin streams of smoke into the pale sky, evidence that fires are already being lit across the city. The first signs of daylight touch the highest buildings while most streets remain hidden beneath long shadows. From above, the city appears almost peaceful, but experience has taught you that this impression never lasts very long. The street below is narrow enough that neighbors living across from one another can easily observe each other's routines without making any special effort. Privacy exists in medieval cities, but it often depends more upon courtesy than distance. A baker's apprentice hurries along the road carrying sacks of flour toward a workshop that has likely been active since the middle of the night. Nearby, a woman empties yesterday's sweepings into the street before returning inside. A merchant unlocks a door while glancing up at the sky, perhaps hoping for favorable weather, perhaps calculating the day's opportunities, or perhaps simply wondering whether he remembered to secure everything properly before going to bed. The smell drifting through the neighborhood is difficult to describe because it contains traces of almost everything happening within the city at once. Wood smoke mixes with the scent of baking bread, damp earth, livestock, leather, cooking porridge, and dozens of other odors produced by people beginning another day of work. Medieval cities rarely smelled pleasant by modern standards, yet residents became accustomed to their surroundings in much the same way people adapt to the sounds of traffic or construction today. What would overwhelm a visitor often passed unnoticed by those who encountered it every day. After dressing, you leave your room and descend a staircase that creaks beneath nearly every step. The building itself appears to possess strong opinions about movement before sunrise. Like many urban structures, it serves multiple purposes at once. Families live on the upper floors while commercial activities occupy the lower levels. In medieval cities, buildings rarely have the luxury of specializing in only one function. Space remains valuable, and every square foot must justify its existence. Once outside, you join the growing flow of people moving through the streets. The city around you has been shaped by centuries of expansion, adaptation, and occasional improvisation. Few roads follow perfectly straight lines. Many buildings stand where previous structures once existed. Generations of residents have altered, repaired, expanded, and rebuilt sections of the city according to immediate needs rather than long-term urban planning. The result is a landscape that often feels as though it grew naturally rather than being designed. As you walk, the city's economic life becomes increasingly visible. Every street contains evidence of work. Workshops occupy ground floors behind open shutters. Small businesses operate from rooms barely larger than storage closets. Skilled craftsmen prepare tools, organize materials, and arrange goods for customers who will arrive throughout the day. The medieval city depends upon hundreds of specialized occupations, many of which remain invisible until someone needs their services. A blacksmith's workshop already glows with the light of an active forge. Inside, the first pieces of metal are being heated for the day's work. The blacksmith's profession touches nearly every aspect of urban life because tools, hinges, locks, nails, horseshoes, and countless other objects require skilled metalworking. Without blacksmiths, many ordinary activities would become significantly more complicated within a matter of days. Farther along the street, a cooper is arranging barrels outside his workshop. At first glance, barrels seem unremarkable, yet they play an essential role in medieval commerce. Food, ale, wine, oil, salted fish, and countless other goods travel inside containers produced by coopers. Entire trade networks rely upon sturdy barrels reaching their destinations without falling apart halfway through the journey. Although kings and generals often dominate historical narratives, the practical success of daily life frequently depends upon individuals whose names never appear in chronicles. The city's market square lies ahead, and even at this early hour signs of preparation are visible everywhere. Temporary stalls are being assembled. Merchants inspect goods delivered during the previous evening. Farmers arriving from nearby villages unload vegetables, eggs, and produce grown beyond the city walls. These markets serve as the economic heart of urban life, connecting rural producers with urban consumers while creating opportunities for countless secondary businesses. Nothing reaches the market by accident. Behind every loaf of bread stands a chain of labor stretching from farmer to miller to baker. Behind every piece of cloth stand shepherds, wool merchants, spinners, dyers, weavers, and traders. Even the simplest purchase often represents the combined efforts of dozens of people working across different occupations. Most residents rarely think about these connections because they exist as part of everyday life, but the city depends upon them continuously. As daylight spreads across the rooftops and more people enter the streets, the pace of activity steadily increases. Apprentices hurry between workshops carrying instructions from masters. Laborers gather near construction sites where new projects demand additional hands. Messengers navigate crowded roads while attempting to reach destinations without becoming trapped behind livestock, carts, or groups of pedestrians engaged in lengthy conversations. Every person around you participates in a larger system that keeps the city functioning. Some provide food. Others create tools. Some transport goods. Others manage accounts, negotiate agreements, repair buildings, maintain roads, produce clothing, or perform dozens of tasks that rarely attract attention until they stop being done. Medieval cities may appear chaotic to modern observers, yet beneath the apparent disorder exists a surprisingly complex network of economic relationships. As the sun finally clears the horizon and golden light begins reaching the streets below, another day fully establishes itself within the city walls. Shopkeepers prepare for customers, craftsmen settle into familiar routines, and merchants begin calculating opportunities that may increase their fortunes before evening arrives. For the thousands of ordinary residents surrounding you, this morning is not remarkable. It is simply another chapter in the continuous story of urban life, a story built not by kings or conquerors, but by the countless workers whose businesses, skills, and labor quietly keep the city alive from one day to the next. By the time the sun has climbed above the rooftops, the city has fully committed itself to another day of commerce. The quiet gray light of dawn has disappeared, replaced by the warmer glow of morning, and with it comes a noticeable change in the mood of the streets. What had begun as scattered activity has now developed into a steady flow of movement. People emerge from side lanes carrying baskets, bundles, tools, ledgers, and goods destined for workshops and stalls. The city seems to draw everyone toward a common destination, and as you follow the growing crowd, it becomes clear where much of that activity is headed. The market square occupies one of the most valuable pieces of land inside the city walls. It is not simply a place where people buy and sell things. It functions as a center of information, employment, negotiation, entertainment, and social interaction. If a visitor wished to understand how a medieval city truly worked, spending a single day in the market would reveal far more than any official document ever could. As you approach, the square appears to be assembling itself before your eyes. Merchants arrange goods on wooden tables while customers begin examining products long before everyone is fully prepared for business. Farmers arriving from surrounding villages unload vegetables, fruit, eggs, and sacks of grain. Some have traveled since the middle of the night to secure favorable positions before the busiest hours begin. Their wagons stand beside countless others, creating temporary rows of commerce that will remain in place until evening. The sounds of bargaining already drift across the square. Medieval markets are rarely silent affairs. Every merchant hopes to attract attention, every customer hopes to secure a favorable price, and both sides usually believe they are considerably more skilled at negotiation than they actually are. Conversations overlap in every direction, producing a constant background hum that rises and falls as transactions unfold. You pass a stall selling bread, one of the most important products available anywhere in the city. Bread is not simply a food item. For many people it forms the foundation of the daily diet. The success or failure of grain harvests can influence prices throughout entire regions, affecting rich and poor alike. A baker's profession carries significant responsibility because communities depend heavily upon a reliable supply of affordable bread. When harvests fail, cities notice almost immediately. Nearby, another merchant displays wheels of cheese stacked carefully on wooden boards. Beside him stands a seller offering smoked fish transported from distant coastal regions. The presence of such goods serves as a reminder that medieval cities rarely survive on local production alone. Trade networks connect towns, villages, ports, and distant territories in ways that are often invisible to ordinary residents. A customer purchasing a simple meal may unknowingly benefit from the labor of people living hundreds of miles away. The market also reveals just how specialized urban economies have become. A visitor walking through the square encounters an astonishing variety of occupations. There are cloth merchants displaying dyed fabrics in colors that required considerable skill and expense to produce. There are spice traders selling products that traveled across continents before reaching the city. There are craftsmen offering knives, tools, belts, shoes, candles, pottery, and countless other necessities. Each item represents a business. Each business supports workers. Each worker depends upon customers. The entire system resembles a web stretching throughout the city and beyond. As you continue through the square, one group of merchants attracts particular attention. Their tables display bolts of cloth folded neatly into organized stacks. To modern eyes, fabric may seem ordinary, but in the medieval world textile production forms one of the most important industries imaginable. Creating cloth requires enormous amounts of labor. Wool must be collected, cleaned, spun into thread, woven into fabric, and often dyed before it reaches the customer. Every stage involves specialized skills, creating employment for large numbers of people. The textile trade has made certain cities extraordinarily wealthy. Entire regions build their economies around producing cloth for domestic use and international export. Successful merchants dealing in textiles sometimes accumulate fortunes substantial enough to rival members of the nobility. While medieval society often appears rigidly divided into social classes, commerce occasionally creates opportunities for ambitious individuals to improve their circumstances. Near the center of the square, a public weighing station stands ready for use. Accurate measurements are vital in commercial transactions, particularly when dealing with grain, metal, or other valuable goods. Disputes over weights and measures occur frequently enough that many cities establish official standards. Customers naturally prefer merchants who do not accidentally discover extra weight whenever it benefits the seller. City officials understand the importance of maintaining trust within the marketplace. Regulations govern everything from prices to product quality. Inspectors may examine goods, verify measurements, or investigate complaints. Although enforcement varies from place to place, authorities recognize that successful commerce depends upon a certain level of confidence. If customers believe every transaction involves deception, economic activity becomes far more difficult. Not all businesses operate from permanent shops. Many individuals earn their living by moving through the market itself. Porters transport goods for merchants who require additional labor. Messengers carry information between clients. Money changers assist travelers arriving with unfamiliar coins. Scribes offer writing services for customers unable to read or write. Every concentration of people creates opportunities for entrepreneurial minds. One particularly important figure is the town crier. News travels more slowly in the medieval world, yet information remains valuable. Official announcements, legal decisions, public notices, and significant events must be communicated somehow. The town crier serves as a human broadcasting system, delivering messages loudly enough that nobody can claim ignorance afterward. As the morning progresses, the square becomes increasingly crowded. Wealthy merchants inspect luxury goods while laborers spend carefully counted coins on practical necessities. Monks move through the crowd. Travelers arrive from distant roads. Apprentices complete errands assigned by masters who prefer not to leave their workshops. People from different backgrounds, professions, and social classes temporarily occupy the same space, connected by the shared activity of buying and selling. The market also serves as an unofficial center of information. Long before newspapers exist, rumors travel through conversations. News from distant regions arrives with traders and travelers. Political developments, military campaigns, harvest reports, and local scandals spread from person to person with remarkable speed. Some information proves accurate. Some undergoes dramatic transformation before reaching its final audience. Medieval gossip often travels faster than official communication. You notice a cluster of people gathered around a storyteller entertaining listeners with tales of distant lands. Whether every detail is true remains open to debate, but accuracy is not always the primary goal. Markets provide opportunities for entertainment alongside commerce. Musicians, performers, jugglers, and storytellers all understand that large crowds create potential audiences. The longer you remain in the square, the more obvious it becomes that the city depends upon this constant exchange of goods and services. Food enters through the market. Raw materials enter through the market. Information enters through the market. Wealth flows through the market. Without it, many businesses throughout the city would struggle to function. As midday approaches, sunlight fills the open square and reflects from windows overlooking the marketplace. The crowd shows no sign of shrinking. If anything, activity continues to increase. New arrivals replace those who have already completed their purchases, ensuring that the flow of commerce rarely stops completely. Looking around, it becomes clear that medieval cities are not held together solely by walls, laws, or rulers. They are sustained by ordinary transactions repeated thousands of times every day. A loaf of bread changes hands. A length of cloth is purchased. A barrel is delivered. A payment is recorded. A bargain is reached. Individually, these moments appear small. Together, they form the economic heartbeat of the city. And while the market square may seem like the center of everything, countless other businesses remain hidden beyond its edges, operating from workshops, warehouses, courtyards, and narrow streets where skilled workers spend their days producing the goods that keep urban life moving forward. Those hidden businesses will become far easier to understand once you leave the square and follow the sounds of labor deeper into the city's working neighborhoods. As the market square gradually disappears behind you, the atmosphere of the city begins to change. The noise of bargaining, public announcements, and crowded stalls fades into the background, replaced by a different rhythm. This is the sound of production rather than exchange. The goods displayed so neatly in the market do not simply appear each morning by some medieval miracle. They must be made, repaired, assembled, stored, and transported, and much of that work takes place in the maze of streets stretching beyond the commercial center. Walking deeper into the city, you enter neighborhoods where workshops occupy nearly every ground floor. From the street, many of these businesses appear surprisingly small. A passerby might assume little of importance happens inside such modest spaces, but appearances can be misleading. Entire livelihoods, family fortunes, and local industries often operate from rooms no larger than a modern garage. The first thing you notice is that every workshop possesses its own distinct sound. A blacksmith's forge announces itself long before it comes into view. The repeated ringing of hammer against metal echoes between buildings and serves almost as a landmark for anyone navigating the area. Nearby, a carpenter's workshop produces a different collection of noises, saws moving through timber, planes smoothing rough surfaces, and occasional bursts of conversation as workers coordinate their efforts. A little farther along, the steady turning of a grinding wheel adds another layer to the city's endless soundtrack. These sounds are so common that most residents barely notice them. To people living here, they are simply part of everyday life. A visitor from the countryside might find the constant noise overwhelming, but city dwellers learn to filter it out much as modern people learn to ignore distant traffic or the hum of electrical appliances. You pause outside a blacksmith's workshop and observe the activity within. The forge glows brightly despite the daylight streaming through the open entrance. Heat radiates outward into the street while workers move with practiced efficiency between fire, anvil, and workbench. Every action appears familiar, repeated countless times over years of experience. The blacksmith does not need to think consciously about each movement. Skill has transformed many tasks into habit. The importance of metalworking is difficult to overstate. Nearly every profession depends upon tools, and nearly every tool eventually requires repair or replacement. Farmers need plow components. Builders need nails and fittings. Merchants require locks. Households need knives, hinges, and cooking equipment. The blacksmith's work touches almost every corner of urban life, even when customers rarely stop to consider where such objects originate. Continuing along the street, you encounter a workshop belonging to a carpenter. Timber remains one of the most valuable materials available in the medieval world. Houses, furniture, carts, barrels, doors, tools, bridges, market stalls, and countless other structures depend upon skilled woodworking. The carpenter's trade combines practical knowledge with creative problem solving because no two pieces of wood are exactly alike. Every project requires adjustments, measurements, and decisions shaped by experience. Inside the workshop, stacks of timber occupy much of the available space. Some boards await future projects while others have already begun their transformation into useful objects. The scent of freshly cut wood fills the air, creating one of the more pleasant smells available within a medieval city. Given enough time, nearly every resident will eventually need the services of a carpenter, whether for repairs, new construction, or the replacement of worn household items. A short distance away, another workshop specializes in leatherworking. Before entering, you become aware of the distinctive smell associated with the trade. Leather is an extraordinarily useful material, but producing it requires processes that many people prefer to keep at a respectful distance from their homes. For this reason, certain trades often cluster together in specific sections of the city, creating unofficial industrial districts long before anyone invents the term. Leatherworkers transform animal hides into products used throughout society. Shoes, belts, pouches, saddles, harnesses, gloves, and countless other items depend upon their skills. Customers visiting the finished goods market may never think about the long journey required to create these products, but every completed object represents hours of labor performed by specialists working behind the scenes. One of the most interesting aspects of medieval workshops is that they rarely function as businesses alone. Most also serve as homes. The distinction between workplace and residence is often far less defined than it is today. A craftsman may live upstairs with family members while conducting business below. Apprentices frequently sleep on the premises as well. Meals are prepared nearby, children grow up surrounded by professional activity, and the rhythms of family life become closely intertwined with the rhythms of work. This arrangement creates a very different relationship with employment. Modern workers often leave their jobs at the end of the day and return home. Many medieval craftsmen simply walk upstairs. As you move through the district, another feature of urban business becomes increasingly visible. Very few people work entirely alone. Most successful workshops depend upon a combination of masters, apprentices, assistants, relatives, and hired laborers. The image of a solitary craftsman producing everything independently rarely reflects reality. Businesses survive because multiple people contribute to their operation. The apprenticeship system plays a particularly important role. Young people enter workshops to learn trades under experienced masters, often spending years acquiring the skills necessary to practice independently. The arrangement benefits both sides. Apprentices gain training and future opportunities, while masters receive assistance with daily tasks. Although the relationship is not always easy, it provides a practical method for passing knowledge from one generation to the next. Many apprentices begin their training while still quite young. Their days involve a mixture of observation, instruction, repetitive practice, and whatever less glamorous chores happen to require attention. Sweeping floors, carrying materials, cleaning tools, and running errands may not sound exciting, but every profession contains necessary work that rarely appears in idealized descriptions. The city's economic strength depends heavily upon this constant transfer of knowledge. Skills cannot be preserved through books alone. Most trades require hands-on experience, and that experience must be taught directly. Every master training an apprentice is, in a sense, helping ensure that the business survives beyond a single lifetime. As the morning advances, deliveries begin arriving at workshops throughout the neighborhood. Carts transport timber, charcoal, metal, wool, and other raw materials. Messengers carry instructions from clients. Customers stop by to discuss commissions, inspect completed work, or negotiate prices. Each workshop forms part of a much larger network connecting suppliers, producers, merchants, and consumers. The complexity of these relationships often goes unnoticed because they function so routinely. Yet the city depends upon them every day. A blacksmith requires iron. The supplier requires transport. The transport company requires carts. The carts require wheels. The wheels require carpenters. The carpenters require tools. The tools require blacksmiths. Every profession supports others in ways both obvious and invisible. By now, sunlight reaches deeper into the streets, illuminating signs hanging above workshop entrances. Some signs display tools associated with particular trades. Others feature symbols recognizable even to residents who cannot read. In a world where literacy is far from universal, visual identification becomes an important form of advertising. Looking around, you begin to appreciate how much of the city's life remains hidden from casual observation. Visitors see market stalls and finished goods. They admire buildings, purchase products, and enjoy services. What they rarely witness is the immense amount of labor occurring behind walls, inside workshops, and within courtyards scattered throughout the city. The medieval economy is built not only upon trade but upon production. Every object has a story. Every tool, garment, barrel, shoe, table, and lock represents hours of effort performed by people whose names are unlikely to survive in history books. Yet their work surrounds you everywhere you look. As you leave the workshop district and continue through the city, another layer of urban business begins to emerge. Beyond the craftsmen and artisans lies an even more organized world of professional associations, regulations, privileges, rivalries, and economic power. To understand how medieval businesses truly operate, you must meet the organizations that influence nearly every trade within the city, the guilds. As you leave the streets filled with workshops and craftsmen, it becomes increasingly clear that medieval cities are not simply collections of individuals working independently. Behind many of the businesses you have encountered stands a layer of organization that helps shape how trade is conducted, who is allowed to practice certain professions, and what standards customers can expect. Although a visitor might not notice it immediately, much of urban economic life is influenced by institutions that operate quietly in the background. These organizations are known as guilds. To modern ears, the word may sound mysterious or even slightly dramatic, as though it belongs in a fantasy novel alongside dragons and enchanted swords. In reality, guilds are remarkably practical. They exist because craftsmen, merchants, and city authorities all have strong reasons for wanting some level of order in an environment where thousands of people depend upon commerce. As you continue through the city, you pass buildings that serve as meeting places for various guilds. Some are modest structures. Others are surprisingly impressive, reflecting the wealth and influence accumulated by successful trades over many years. A prosperous guild often possesses enough resources to maintain property, support members during difficult times, organize religious events, and occasionally remind local politicians that economic power can be a persuasive force. The medieval city may appear chaotic from the outside, but beneath the surface many industries operate according to detailed expectations. Customers want reliable products. Skilled workers want protection from unfair competition. City officials want businesses to function without constant disputes. Guilds emerge partly because they offer solutions to these problems. Imagine purchasing a pair of shoes in a city where absolutely anyone can claim to be a shoemaker. Some craftsmen might possess years of training. Others might have acquired their expertise approximately 15 minutes before opening for business. The results would vary considerably. Customers would struggle to know whom they could trust, and reputable craftsmen would find themselves competing against people willing to produce poor-quality goods for lower prices. Guilds attempt to address this issue by establishing standards. They determine who may practice a trade, oversee training, monitor quality, protect professional reputations. While the system is far from perfect, many residents consider it preferable to complete disorder. You arrive at a street where several textile-related businesses operate. Cloth production represents one of the most important industries in many medieval cities, and guild regulations often influence every stage of the process. Wool merchants, dyers, weavers, and cloth finishers may belong to separate organizations, each responsible for overseeing a specific part of production. What appears to customers as a simple piece of fabric is actually the result of multiple professions working together under a network of established rules. The importance of reputation becomes particularly apparent in this environment. Modern businesses can advertise through newspapers, television, websites, and social media. Medieval craftsmen rely heavily upon word of mouth. A reputation built over decades can attract customers from distant towns. A damaged reputation can be equally powerful, though for entirely different reasons. People talk. Customers share experiences. Neighbors exchange opinions. Merchants discuss reliability. Travelers carry stories to other cities. In a world where information spreads primarily through conversation, trust becomes one of the most valuable assets any business can possess. A successful craftsman therefore spends years cultivating not only skill but credibility. Producing good work matters. Delivering orders on time matters. Treating customers fairly matters. Even personal behavior outside the workshop can influence professional opportunities. Business and reputation are often inseparable. As you walk through another district, you notice a young apprentice carrying tools behind an older craftsman. The relationship between apprentice and master forms one of the foundations of guild life. Training is not treated as a brief process. Learning a trade may require years of observation, practice, correction, and repetition before an apprentice develops genuine expertise. During this period, the apprentice gradually acquires more responsibility. Simple tasks eventually lead to more complicated ones. Mistakes become lessons. Routine work becomes familiar. Knowledge that once seemed overwhelming slowly transforms into instinct. The goal is not merely to teach techniques. The goal is to preserve standards. Guilds understand that their collective reputation depends upon the quality of future craftsmen just as much as current ones. For that reason, many trades establish clear stages of advancement. An apprentice may eventually become a journeyman, a skilled worker capable of earning wages and gaining experience. After further years of work, some attempt to become masters themselves. Reaching that level often requires demonstrating competence through completed projects and satisfying the expectations of the guild. The process can be demanding, but medieval businesses frequently view it as an investment. Skilled workers contribute to the prosperity of entire industries. Poorly trained workers create problems for everyone. As midday approaches, activity continues across the city. Deliveries arrive at workshops. Merchants review inventories. Customers inspect goods before making purchases. Behind many of these ordinary interactions stands a framework of expectations developed over generations. Guilds also serve social functions that extend beyond economics. Members may assist one another during illness, contribute to charitable efforts, organize religious celebrations, and support families facing hardship. In many cases, belonging to a guild provides a sense of community as well as professional identity. This becomes particularly important in cities where populations continue to grow. Urban life offers opportunities, but it can also feel impersonal. Guild membership helps create networks of familiarity within crowded environments. People know one another through shared trades, shared responsibilities, and shared interests. Of course, not everyone views guilds positively. Some merchants complain that regulations restrict competition. Some ambitious craftsmen dislike barriers to advancement. Some customers suspect prices might be lower without certain rules. These debates are hardly unique to the medieval world. Questions about regulation, competition, quality, and economic freedom continue to appear in different forms throughout history. Medieval cities simply conduct the conversation using different terminology. As you move toward one of the larger commercial streets, the wealth associated with successful businesses becomes increasingly visible. Certain merchants occupy spacious buildings with storage areas, offices, and living quarters large enough to impress visitors. Their success demonstrates an important reality about medieval urban life. Although noble titles often dominate historical narratives, commerce can generate considerable influence. A prosperous merchant may employ numerous workers, finance trading ventures, own property, and maintain connections across multiple cities. Wealth earned through business creates opportunities that would have been difficult to imagine for earlier generations. Yet even the most successful merchants remain dependent upon the larger economic system surrounding them. Trade routes must remain open. Goods must reach markets. Customers must possess money to spend. Stability encourages prosperity, while conflict, disease, or poor harvests can disrupt entire industries. For this reason, business owners often pay close attention to events occurring far beyond the city walls. News of political disputes, military campaigns, or shortages elsewhere may eventually affect prices and profits at home. Medieval commerce is more interconnected than many people realize. As afternoon sunlight brightens the upper stories of the buildings around you, another pattern begins to emerge. While workshops and guilds form the backbone of production, they are only part of the city's economy. Thousands of travelers arrive each year seeking food, shelter, transportation, and information. Meeting those needs has created an entire collection of businesses dedicated to serving people who may only remain in the city for a short time. To understand that side of urban life, you will need to leave the world of craftsmen and merchants for a while and step into the inns, taverns, and ghosthouses where locals and strangers regularly cross paths, exchange news, and occasionally create stories that become much more entertaining with each retelling. By the middle of the afternoon, the city has settled into the steady rhythm that carries it through most working days. The excitement of the morning market has softened into a more predictable flow of activity, and many workshops continue their labor behind open doors while merchants monitor inventories, negotiate contracts, and calculate whether the day is proving profitable. Yet not everyone moving through the streets belongs to the city itself. Some arrived at dawn. Others entered through the gates only moments ago. A few may leave before sunset, while many hope to remain for several nights. Their presence supports an entire category of businesses that thrive wherever travelers gather. Following one of the larger streets toward a city gate, you begin encountering signs hanging above doorways. Unlike modern storefronts, which often rely on written names and elaborate branding, medieval businesses frequently use recognizable symbols. Painted animals, tankards, ships, crowns, stars, keys, or other images identify establishments to customers regardless of literacy. A traveler unfamiliar with the local language can still recognize a welcoming inn when a sign depicting a bed or a drinking cup swings gently above the entrance. Travel has always created opportunities for business. Merchants moving goods between cities require accommodation. Pilgrims undertaking long religious journeys need places to rest. Messengers, craftsmen, scholars, soldiers, and countless others spend portions of their lives on the road. Even in an age when travel is slower, more expensive, and often less comfortable than modern transportation, roads remain busy enough to support a substantial hospitality industry. You approach a large inn situated near one of the main routes entering the city. Its location is no accident. Successful innkeepers understand that convenience attracts customers. A weary traveler arriving after a long journey is unlikely to wander through unfamiliar streets searching for alternatives when shelter is available nearby. The building itself is larger than many surrounding structures. Several stories rise above a spacious ground floor, and an enclosed courtyard occupies the rear portion of the property. Horses stand near a stable while carts wait beneath covered areas designed to protect goods from rain and theft. The entire complex resembles a carefully organized machine dedicated to solving the practical problems faced by travelers. Stepping inside, you immediately notice how different the atmosphere feels from the workshops you visited earlier. The sounds here are conversational rather than industrial. Merchants discuss prices over meals. Travelers exchange stories gathered from distant roads. Servants move between tables carrying food and drink while attempting to navigate crowded spaces without colliding with customers whose attention is focused elsewhere. An inn performs many functions simultaneously. It provides food, lodging, storage, information, meeting space, and often a degree of security. In a world where reliable information can be as valuable as gold, travelers frequently arrive carrying news from other regions. As a result, inns become informal centers of communication. A merchant arriving from a distant city may bring reports of changing market conditions. A pilgrim might share stories about conditions along major routes. A messenger could carry information regarding political developments, military activity, or local disputes. Much of this news spreads through conversation long before any official announcement reaches the public. The innkeeper occupies a position requiring a surprising variety of skills. Running such an establishment involves far more than providing beds and meals. Supplies must be purchased regularly. Staff must be managed. Rooms require maintenance. Customers expect security for both themselves and their possessions. Accounts must be kept. Disputes occasionally need resolution. The successful innkeeper combines the responsibilities of business owner, manager, host, accountant, and diplomat. Nearby, a group of merchants sits around a table reviewing documents while discussing future arrangements. Meetings of this sort occur frequently. Inns provide neutral locations where people can conduct business away from their homes or workshops. Contracts are discussed, partnerships negotiated, and deals finalized in rooms filled with the smells of cooking food and burning firewood. The food itself represents another important business opportunity. Travelers need meals, and preparing those meals requires an extensive supply chain. Grain, vegetables, meat, fish, ale, wine, spices, and countless other ingredients arrive from producers both near and far. The kitchen becomes a small economic hub connected to farmers, merchants, transporters, and craftsmen throughout the region. Not every establishment serves the same clientele. Some inns cater to wealthy merchants capable of paying for private rooms, superior meals, and additional comforts. Others accommodate ordinary travelers whose budgets require more practical arrangements. In many places, multiple guests share sleeping spaces, particularly during busy seasons when available beds become scarce. Privacy, as modern people understand it, is often a luxury rather than an expectation. A traveler may spend the night surrounded by strangers from different regions, professions, and backgrounds. This arrangement occasionally produces friendships, business opportunities, and fascinating conversations. It also occasionally produces snoring powerful enough to become a local legend. A short distance away stands a tavern, which serves a slightly different role within urban life. While inns focus heavily on accommodation, taverns concentrate on food, drink, and social interaction. Locals gather after work. Travelers stop briefly before continuing their journeys. News circulates. Stories grow increasingly impressive with each retelling. The tavern's importance extends beyond entertainment. In many respects, it functions as an informal community center. People discuss business opportunities, exchange information, seek employment, settle disagreements, and maintain social connections. A visitor hoping to understand local concerns could learn a great deal simply by listening carefully to conversations unfolding around the room. The owner of a successful tavern must possess a keen understanding of people. Customers arrive with different expectations, different temperaments, and varying levels of sobriety. Maintaining an environment where patrons continue returning requires balancing hospitality with order. Most tavern keepers become highly skilled at recognizing situations likely to cause trouble before those situations fully develop. Outside, the city continues its daily routine. Deliveries arrive. Customers come and go. Travelers enter through the gates while others prepare to depart. Every movement generates economic activity for businesses connected to transportation and hospitality. You begin noticing workers whose professions depend entirely upon serving travelers. Stable hands care for horses. Porters transport luggage and goods. Wagon repairers maintain vehicles damaged by rough roads. Guides assist newcomers unfamiliar with local streets. Money changers help visitors carrying foreign coins. Entire occupations exist because people continue moving between cities. The medieval economy is far more mobile than many imagine. While most people spend their lives relatively close to home, a constant flow of travelers connects distant regions through commerce, religion, politics, and communication. Inns and taverns stand at the center of that movement, transforming temporary visitors into reliable customers. As afternoon gradually approaches evening, sunlight stretches across the streets and illuminates the upper windows of buildings throughout the city. The busiest hours of commercial activity are beginning to slow, yet another phase of urban life is preparing to take their place. Workshops will close. Market stalls will disappear. Merchants will secure goods behind locked doors. But the city itself is far from finished. As daylight fades, a different collection of businesses emerges from the background. Some depend upon artificial light. Others depend upon entertainment. Many rely upon people who have finally completed a long day's work and are ready to spend their remaining hours elsewhere. To understand the medieval city completely, you must experience what happens after the sun begins sinking toward the horizon and the working day slowly gives way to the evening. As the afternoon gradually gives way to evening, the city begins a transformation that would be familiar to almost every generation of urban residents throughout history. The pace of activity does not necessarily slow. Instead, it changes direction. The businesses that dominated the morning and afternoon surrender some of their importance to a different collection of occupations, services, and routines. The market square that seemed so crowded earlier in the day begins to empty as merchants pack away their remaining goods. Workshop doors close one by one. Apprentices finish their final tasks. The ringing of hammers becomes less frequent. Deliveries grow less common. Yet none of this signals the end of activity. It simply marks the beginning of a new chapter in the city's daily cycle. Walking through the streets, you notice craftsmen sweeping workshop floors before locking doors for the night. Some carry completed projects home with them. Others leave unfinished work on benches where it will await their return in the morning. The city contains countless small rituals associated with closing a business, and many have changed surprisingly little over the centuries. Inventories must be checked. Tools must be stored. Fires must be managed carefully. Valuable goods require protection from theft, weather, and the occasional rat whose ambitions greatly exceed its size. The medieval workday can be long, particularly during seasons when daylight lasts well into the evening. For laborers, craftsmen, merchants, and apprentices alike, the transition from work to leisure is often gradual rather than immediate. A carpenter might stop building furniture but still spend time discussing tomorrow's projects. A merchant may close a shop while continuing to negotiate arrangements over supper. Economic life does not simply switch off at sunset. As you move through one of the larger streets, the changing light creates a different atmosphere. The sharp brightness of midday softens into warmer tones. Long shadows stretch across stone walls and timber facades. Smoke from cooking fires drifts upward into the cooling air. Windows begin glowing with candlelight and firelight, creating small pockets of warmth throughout the city. For many residents, this is the first opportunity all day to pause. Meals become an important part of evening life. Families gather inside homes. Workers share food with fellow apprentices or household members. Travelers settle into inns. Taverns begin attracting larger crowds as customers seek conversation, refreshment, and perhaps a temporary escape from the demands of work. Food itself represents a significant business. While some households prepare meals at home, many people purchase cooked food from vendors operating throughout the city. Not everyone possesses suitable cooking facilities. Not everyone has the time or resources to prepare elaborate meals. As a result, a thriving trade develops around providing ready-to-eat food. Street vendors occupy familiar locations where customers know to find them. Some sell pies filled with meat or vegetables. Others offer bread, fish, roasted foods, or simple snacks designed for people who need a quick meal before continuing with their evening. The aromas drifting through the streets often guide customers more effectively than any sign or advertisement. You stop near a vendor whose business depends almost entirely upon timing. Throughout the day, workers have been too busy to linger. Now they have both hunger and a few coins to spend. The vendor understands this perfectly. Success in business often comes down to recognizing when and where customers need something. The city contains hundreds of people making similar calculations. A candle maker understands that darkness increases demand. A tavern owner understands that workers seek company after long hours. A baker understands which times of day produce the greatest sales. Economic opportunities emerge from routines, and medieval business owners are often excellent observers of human behavior. As evening deepens, another group of workers becomes increasingly active. Watchmen begin preparing for their duties. Maintaining order after dark presents unique challenges in a world without electric lighting. Streets become more difficult to navigate. Identifying troublemakers becomes harder. Small problems can quickly become larger ones when visibility is limited. Many cities employ watchmen to patrol streets, monitor gates, and respond to disturbances. The effectiveness of these efforts varies considerably from place to place, but their presence reflects a practical reality. Commerce depends upon a degree of security. Customers prefer visiting cities where theft, violence, and disorder remain relatively controlled. The watchman's profession rarely attracts the admiration given to soldiers or nobles, yet urban life would be far more difficult without individuals willing to spend long hours walking dark streets while most residents sleep. In some cases, the greatest reward for competent watchmen is that nothing particularly interesting happens during their shift. Nearby, lamps begin appearing in windows and doorways. Light itself becomes a valuable commodity after sunset. Candles, oil lamps, lanterns, and firewood all support businesses connected to illumination. Modern people often take abundant light for granted, but in the medieval city every source of light requires labor, materials, and expense. A household wishing to remain active after dark must pay for that privilege. A merchant reviewing accounts by candlelight depends upon multiple industries. A tavern welcoming evening customers depends upon illumination. A traveler reading correspondence depends upon illumination. Even darkness creates economic opportunities. The streets themselves remain surprisingly active. People continue visiting friends, conducting business, attending religious services, and participating in social activities. Although some modern depictions portray medieval cities as becoming completely silent after sunset, reality is often more complicated. Major urban centers maintain a level of activity well into the evening, particularly in prosperous regions where commerce remains strong. You pass a small gathering outside a residence where neighbors exchange news accumulated throughout the day. Such conversations serve as informal information networks connecting different parts of the city. People discuss prices, employment opportunities, family matters, political developments, and local events. Long before modern communication systems, communities relied heavily upon face-to-face interaction. Information itself functions almost like a commodity. Useful knowledge can save money, can create opportunities, can prevent mistakes. Many businesses depend upon staying informed. A merchant unaware of changing prices may lose profits. A craftsman unaware of customer demand may produce the wrong goods. Even ordinary residents benefit from knowing which opportunities and challenges exist around them. As darkness gradually settles over the rooftops, the city reveals another aspect of its character. During the day, economic activity is highly visible. Market stalls, workshops, and deliveries occupy public spaces. At night, much of that activity moves indoors. Conversations occur around tables. Agreements are discussed beside fireplaces. Plans are made for tomorrow's work. The city's economy never truly stops. It simply becomes less visible. Behind closed shutters, merchants calculate accounts. Craftsmen prepare future projects. Travelers plan routes. Innkeepers review supplies. Bakers begin thinking about work that will start long before sunrise. While some residents prepare for sleep, others are only beginning their most important tasks. There are professions that operate primarily after dark, businesses that depend upon nighttime activity, and workers whose schedules differ completely from the majority of the population. To understand the medieval city fully, you must follow them into the hours when most households extinguish their candles, lock their doors, and leave the streets to those whose livelihoods continue beneath the cover of night. By the time darkness settles fully over the rooftops, the city has become a very different place from the one you explored during the morning. The crowded market square now stands mostly empty, its stalls dismantled and its merchants gone home with the day's earnings carefully stored away. Workshop doors remain closed, and the constant noise of hammers, saws, and deliveries has faded into memory. Yet despite the quieter atmosphere, the city is far from asleep. Looking down a narrow street illuminated by scattered lanterns and candlelit windows, you begin to understand that medieval urban life never truly stops. It simply changes shape. The activities that dominate daylight hours retreat indoors, while a different collection of occupations, responsibilities, and routines emerges to take their place. The first thing you notice is the darkness itself. Modern cities are flooded with artificial light. Streets glow throughout the night, and even the quietest neighborhoods remain visible beneath electric lamps. Medieval cities are different. Darkness is a physical presence. Beyond the reach of lanterns and windows, entire sections of the street disappear into shadow. Distances seem greater. Familiar landmarks become harder to recognize. Every pool of light appears more valuable because so much of the surrounding world remains hidden. This darkness creates challenges, but it also creates opportunities for business. A lantern maker, a candle maker, an oil merchant depends upon it. Every household wishing to extend its activities beyond sunset contributes, in one way or another, to an economy built around producing light. As you continue walking, you pass several homes where candlelight flickers through wooden shutters. Inside, families are finishing evening meals, discussing the day's events, repairing clothing, or preparing for tomorrow's work. For many residents, nighttime provides one of the few opportunities to spend uninterrupted time with relatives. The demands of labor leave little room for leisure during the day, making these quieter hours particularly valuable. Not everyone is preparing for sleep, however. Inns and taverns remain busy. From open doorways comes the sound of conversation, laughter, and the occasional disagreement regarding subjects that seemed much simpler before several mugs of ale entered the discussion. Travelers arriving late seek food and shelter before the city gates close. Merchants discuss future ventures. Laborers enjoy a brief period of relaxation after long hours of physical work. Inside one tavern, a musician performs for a small audience gathered around a fire. Entertainment forms a modest but important part of the urban economy. Musicians, storytellers, performers, and entertainers may not occupy the same social position as wealthy merchants, but they provide services that many people are willing to pay for. Human beings have always valued opportunities to escape routine, share experiences, and enjoy a few hours of amusement. The medieval city contains an entire network of occupations devoted to making life more enjoyable, not merely more practical. As you leave the tavern district and continue through the streets, another group of workers becomes visible. These individuals rarely receive much attention during the daytime because their responsibilities are closely tied to the hours after sunset. A watchman carrying a lantern moves slowly along the road ahead. His pace is unhurried. His attention is not. Part of his job involves observing details that others overlook. An unlocked door, a suspicious noise, a fire left unattended, or a dispute threatening to become something larger can all demand immediate attention. Cities invest in night watches because protecting property and maintaining order remains essential for economic stability. Businesses depend upon secure streets. Merchants depend upon secure warehouses. Residents depend upon secure neighborhoods. The watchman's presence may not eliminate every problem, but it serves as a reminder that someone is paying attention. Farther along, you encounter workers whose duties begin precisely because everyone else is heading home. Bakers, for example, often prepare for their busiest period long before sunrise. In some workshops, fires are already being tended. Ingredients are being measured. Dough is being mixed. While most residents sleep, preparations quietly begin for the bread that will appear in markets and homes tomorrow morning. This pattern exists throughout the city. Many essential services operate according to schedules invisible to the average customer. A customer purchasing bread rarely witnesses the nighttime labor behind it. A merchant receiving deliveries rarely sees the workers preparing goods before dawn. Urban economies depend upon countless unseen efforts occurring beyond public view. As you move closer to one of the city gates, the atmosphere changes again. The roads are quieter here, but not empty. Travelers arriving late hurry toward accommodations before gates close for the night. Gatekeepers monitor movement carefully, balancing security with practicality. Closing the gates too early creates problems for legitimate travelers. Closing them too late creates different problems altogether. The management of city gates is itself a significant responsibility. Trade depends upon movement. Security depends upon control. Every city must find a balance between welcoming commerce and protecting residents. Nearby, several wagon drivers discuss plans for tomorrow's journey. Their goods remain secured beneath coverings while horses rest after a long day on the road. Transportation forms one of the most important industries in the medieval world. Every market depends upon it. Every merchant depends upon it. Every city depends upon it. Without reliable movement of goods, urban life becomes far more difficult to sustain. Listening to their conversation, you realize how much planning lies behind even the simplest commercial transaction. Weather conditions, road quality, bridge repairs, seasonal demand, and local politics all influence decisions. Success often belongs to those who prepare carefully rather than those who simply react to circumstances. The farther you walk, the quieter the streets become. Yet even here signs of economic activity remain visible. Warehouses store valuable goods awaiting future sale. Stables care for animals that will transport products tomorrow. Storage yards protect materials destined for workshops and construction sites. A medieval city is constantly preparing for its own future. Goods arriving today may not be sold for weeks. Materials purchased now may become finished products months later. Investments made this season may only reveal their value next year. Patience is often as important as skill. Looking upward, you see the silhouettes of rooftops against the night sky. Somewhere beyond them, thousands of residents are settling into sleep. Others remain awake, occupied by professions that require nighttime labor. Together they form a system far larger than any individual business. The city's economy resembles a living organism. Food enters through gates and markets. Materials flow through workshops. Goods move between merchants and customers. Information spreads through conversations and travel. Money changes hands countless times each day. Every occupation contributes something. Every business depends upon others. And although individual residents may only see a small portion of the process, the entire city works because these countless connections continue functioning together. As the night deepens and the streets grow quieter, your attention begins shifting toward another aspect of urban life that influences nearly every resident regardless of profession. Beyond markets, workshops, taverns, and transport networks stands an institution whose presence can be found in almost every neighborhood. Its buildings dominate skylines. Its bells mark the passage of time. Its officials participate in education, charity, politics, and daily routines. To understand the hidden businesses of medieval cities completely, you must next explore the powerful relationship between religion, economics, and community life that shaped urban society in ways both obvious and surprisingly practical. Church bells begin echoing across the rooftops long before much of the city has fully awakened. Their sound drifts over workshops, courtyards, warehouses, market squares, and narrow residential lanes, reaching nearly every corner within the walls. Few institutions possess a presence as constant as the church. Whether a resident spends the day forging iron, selling cloth, baking bread, transporting goods, or repairing roofs, religious life remains woven into the rhythm of the city. The church is not simply a place of worship. It is a landowner, an employer, a charitable institution, a center of education, and one of the most influential organizations in medieval urban society. The church tower dominates the skyline from almost every neighborhood. Travelers approaching from the countryside often see it before they see individual houses. Merchants use it as a landmark when navigating unfamiliar streets. Residents hear its bells marking the passage of hours, feast days, celebrations, and emergencies. In a world without wristwatches, public clocks, or mobile phones, the ringing of church bells helps organize daily life in a surprisingly practical way. A great deal of medieval business depends upon timing. Markets open at specific hours. Workshops begin work early in the morning. City gates follow schedules. Religious services occur throughout the week. The church provides a shared structure that helps coordinate these activities. Most people do not consciously think about this arrangement because it has always existed. Yet without common systems for measuring time, urban life would become considerably more complicated. Moving through the city, it quickly becomes apparent that churches own far more property than many visitors expect. Some possess gardens, storage buildings, workshops, rental properties, agricultural land outside the walls, and various sources of income accumulated over generations. Managing these resources requires administration, record-keeping, maintenance, and financial planning. Religious institutions therefore become employers as well as spiritual centers. Clerks maintain records. Builders repair structures. Laborers care for property. Gardeners cultivate food. Servants perform daily tasks. Messengers carry correspondence. A large church may support dozens of occupations directly and influence many more indirectly. This practical side of religious life often surprises modern observers because historical discussions tend to focus on theology, politics, or famous religious figures. Yet the day-to-day operation of a medieval church involves countless ordinary responsibilities. Roofs leak. Walls require repairs. Supplies must be purchased. Accounts must be balanced. Buildings need cleaning. Property must be managed. Even institutions devoted to spiritual matters discover that someone eventually has to fix the door hinges. The church also plays a major role in education. Literacy remains relatively uncommon throughout much of the medieval world, and many opportunities for learning are connected to religious institutions. Schools attached to churches or monasteries provide instruction for students who may later become clerks, scholars, administrators, or members of the clergy. The ability to read and write creates economic opportunities unavailable to many others. Merchants need contracts. Governments need records. Courts require documentation. Wealthy families seek educated individuals capable of managing correspondence and financial affairs. Every literate person becomes part of a larger network supporting administration and commerce. A successful city depends not only on physical labor but also on information. Documents record ownership. Contracts establish agreements. Accounts track payments. Letters connect distant locations. Without writing, much of urban business would become difficult to organize. Throughout the city, charitable activities connected to religious institutions form another important part of community life. Medieval cities contain significant inequalities. Wealthy merchants live only a short distance from laborers struggling to support their families. Successful craftsmen may prosper while others experience illness, injury, or financial hardship. Religious organizations frequently provide assistance in such circumstances. Food may be distributed to those in need. Travelers may receive temporary aid. The sick may receive care. Orphans may find support. Widows may obtain assistance. The scale and effectiveness of these efforts vary widely depending on location, resources, and historical circumstances, but charity remains a visible and important function of many religious institutions. For many residents, the church serves as one of the few places where different social groups regularly occupy the same space. Wealthy merchants, craftsmen, laborers, apprentices, and city officials all participate in aspects of religious life. Their experiences differ greatly, but shared institutions help create a sense of community within an environment that might otherwise feel fragmented. The relationship between religion and commerce is often more complicated than it first appears. Merchants make donations. Guilds sponsor religious events. Churches purchase goods and services from local businesses. Construction projects create work for builders, stonecutters, carpenters, and artists. Festivals attract visitors who spend money throughout the city. Economic activity and religious life constantly influence one another. A prosperous city often supports impressive religious buildings. Impressive religious buildings attract visitors. Visitors create business opportunities. Business growth generates wealth. Wealth contributes to further development. The cycle continues across generations. Large construction projects provide particularly striking examples of this relationship. Building or expanding a church can require years, sometimes decades, of labor. Stone must be quarried and transported. Timber must be prepared. Skilled craftsmen must be hired. Decorative elements require artists, sculptors, painters, and metalworkers. Entire industries benefit from these projects. A resident walking past a church under construction might see only walls slowly rising from the ground. Behind the scenes, however, hundreds of people may be contributing materials, labor, expertise, and resources. Even after construction is complete, maintenance remains a constant responsibility. Medieval buildings face weather, wear, and occasional disasters. Fires, storms, and structural problems create ongoing demand for repairs. The work never truly ends. The church calendar also shapes the city's economic life in subtle ways. Feast days, festivals, and religious celebrations influence travel, trade, and public gatherings. Certain periods bring larger crowds into the city. Others alter working routines. Businesses learn to adapt their schedules around these recurring events just as modern companies adapt to holidays and seasonal demand. Walking through the streets, you begin to recognize how thoroughly religious institutions are integrated into urban society. Their influence extends beyond worship services and ceremonial occasions. They help educate future generations. They employ workers. They own property. They support charitable efforts. They participate in economic networks connecting countless individuals and professions. Most residents probably do not spend much time reflecting upon this reality. The system simply exists around them. A baker hears church bells and begins work. A merchant references a religious holiday when planning future sales. A guild participates in a local celebration. A traveler seeks directions using a church tower as a landmark. The connections become so common that they often fade into the background. Yet those connections help hold the city together. Looking beyond the church walls, another layer of urban life begins to emerge. Markets, workshops, inns, guilds, and religious institutions all contribute to the city's success, but none of them could function effectively without the movement of goods from one place to another. Every loaf of bread, barrel of wine, bundle of cloth, and shipment of timber arrives through transportation networks stretching far beyond the city gates. To understand how medieval cities became prosperous, you must follow those roads outward and explore the merchants, carriers, warehouses, and trade routes that connect one community to another across vast distances. The city walls have been a constant presence throughout your journey. Their towers have appeared above rooftops from nearly every neighborhood, and their gates have quietly controlled the movement of people, animals, and goods from dawn until dusk. Yet after spending so much time inside the city, it becomes impossible to ignore an obvious question. Where does everything come from? The bread sold in the market does not originate inside the market. The timber stacked beside carpenters' workshops does not grow between stone streets. The wool hanging inside textile shops is not produced within city walls. Every object you have encountered during the course of the day has arrived from somewhere else, carried along roads that stretch far beyond the horizon and connected to people whose faces most city residents will never see. Standing near one of the main gates, you watch another line of wagons approaching from the countryside. The drivers have likely been traveling since sunrise. Dust clings to their boots, their clothing, and nearly every surface of their carts. The horses move at a patient pace that suggests this journey has been repeated countless times before. Nobody appears hurried. Medieval transportation rewards preparation far more often than speed. A traveler who rushes risks broken equipment, exhausted animals, and expensive delays. A traveler who plans carefully usually arrives eventually, which in many cases is considered success enough. The countryside surrounding the city is far more important than many urban residents realize. From within the walls, it is easy to think of the city as the center of everything. Markets overflow with goods, workshops produce useful objects, and merchants negotiate deals that affect entire neighborhoods. Yet the city cannot feed itself, heat itself, or build itself without a steady flow of resources arriving from beyond its boundaries. Fields stretch across the landscape in every direction, producing grain that will eventually become bread, porridge, and ale. Farmers spend entire seasons cultivating crops that may only appear briefly in urban markets before being transformed into something else. Livestock raised in nearby villages provide meat, wool, leather, and countless secondary products that support urban industries. Forests supply timber for construction and fuel for fires. Quarries provide stone. Rivers provide fish, transportation, and access to distant regions. The city may be the destination, but the surrounding countryside is the foundation. Most urban residents rarely witness the complete journey these materials undertake. They purchase bread without seeing the fields where the grain was planted. They sit at wooden tables without knowing where the timber was harvested. They wear woolen garments without ever meeting the shepherds responsible for producing the raw material. This separation creates an illusion that cities operate independently, when in reality they depend upon vast networks of labor extending far beyond the walls. The gate itself functions as more than a defensive structure. Throughout the day it serves as a checkpoint where commerce enters the city. Guards observe arrivals, officials monitor activity, and merchants keep a close eye on deliveries they have been expecting. Every wagon passing beneath the archway represents business opportunities for someone. Goods arriving today may appear in workshops tomorrow and in markets the following week. Inside the gate, activity continues almost immediately. Porters wait for work transporting heavy loads through crowded streets. Warehouse workers prepare storage space for incoming shipments. Merchants inspect deliveries to ensure that promised goods have actually arrived in the condition expected. Medieval commerce relies heavily on trust, but even trusted business partners occasionally discover that a barrel contains less than anticipated or that a shipment endured a rougher journey than anyone would prefer. Walking alongside one of the wagons, you begin to appreciate how much effort is required simply to move goods from one place to another. Roads vary enormously in quality. Some are relatively reliable routes maintained through regular use and occasional repairs. Others appear to have developed through a long series of compromises between geography, weather, and human optimism. A journey that looks simple on a map can become considerably more complicated when heavy rain transforms sections of road into mud deep enough to challenge both animals and drivers. Bridges create their own challenges. Rivers are useful for transportation, but they also interrupt overland travel. Some crossings are sturdy and dependable. Others inspire a level of caution that suggests nobody involved fully trusts the structure. Travelers learn quickly which routes save time and which routes merely sound efficient until reality becomes involved. Weather influences nearly every aspect of transportation. Merchants planning long-distance trade pay close attention to seasonal conditions because a profitable journey can become an expensive mistake if roads become impassable. Winter introduces additional complications. Snow, ice, and freezing temperatures can slow travel dramatically. Spring brings mud. Autumn brings storms. Every season presents opportunities and difficulties that experienced traders learn to anticipate. The farther goods travel, the more remarkable their presence becomes. Local vegetables arriving from nearby villages are one thing. Imported spices are something entirely different. A customer examining a small pouch of pepper in a market stall is looking at the final stage of a journey that may have crossed multiple regions, passed through numerous hands, and required months of travel. Such products attract attention not only because of their value but because they serve as reminders of how connected the medieval world can be. Merchants occupy a unique position within this system. Their profession depends upon understanding distances, prices, risks, and opportunities. Success requires more than simply buying and selling goods. It demands constant observation. Conditions change. Harvests succeed or fail. Political situations evolve. New opportunities emerge while old ones disappear. A merchant who ignores such developments may discover that yesterday's profitable venture has become tomorrow's financial disappointment. Information therefore becomes almost as valuable as the goods themselves. Travelers carry news between cities. Merchants exchange reports regarding prices and demand. Innkeepers hear stories from visitors arriving along major routes. A single piece of reliable information can influence decisions affecting entire shipments. Knowing where grain is scarce or where cloth is selling particularly well may create opportunities unavailable to competitors who remain unaware. This constant movement of information creates an invisible network stretching across the landscape. Long before newspapers, telegraphs, or digital communication, news travels through conversation. It arrives with wagon drivers, merchants, pilgrims, sailors, and travelers. Some reports are accurate. Others become more entertaining with every retelling. Experienced merchants learn the difference between useful intelligence and the medieval equivalent of someone confidently repeating a rumor they heard from a friend of a friend. Beyond the commercial districts, warehouses occupy some of the most important yet least celebrated buildings in the city. They rarely attract admiration from visitors. Nobody travels great distances to admire a storage facility. Yet warehouses perform essential functions. Goods arriving from distant regions cannot always be sold immediately. Some must wait for customers. Others await redistribution. Seasonal products may remain in storage for extended periods before market conditions become favorable. Inside these buildings, workers organize, protect, and monitor inventories worth considerable sums of money. A well-managed warehouse contributes to economic stability. A poorly managed one can transform valuable cargo into expensive waste. Rats, moisture, theft, fire, and simple human error all present risks requiring constant attention. Near the riverfront, the scale of trade becomes even more apparent. Boats unload cargo while workers carry goods between vessels and storage facilities. The waterfront possesses an energy distinct from the rest of the city. Every arrival brings new products, new opportunities, and occasionally new problems. River transport offers advantages that overland travel cannot easily match. Large quantities of cargo can be moved more efficiently by water, making rivers some of the most valuable commercial assets a city can possess. The river connects communities separated by distances that would otherwise seem daunting. A merchant standing on the waterfront may never visit every location linked by the waterway, yet business decisions made here can influence people living far upstream or downstream. The city becomes part of a much larger economic landscape, connected by routes that carry both goods and information. Watching the activity along the docks, it becomes clear that medieval prosperity is built upon movement. Products move from farms to markets. Materials move from forests to workshops. Finished goods move from craftsmen to customers. Information moves between cities. Money moves through every stage of the process. None of these journeys occur automatically. Each requires planning, labor, and cooperation among people who may never meet one another. By the time evening begins settling over the city once again, wagons continue arriving through the gates while others prepare to depart. Warehouse doors close. Merchants review accounts. Boat crews secure vessels along the river. Another day of commerce gradually draws to a close, yet preparations for tomorrow are already underway. Looking back toward the city walls, you realize that everything you have explored throughout this journey is connected. The baker depends upon grain arriving from outside the city. The blacksmith requires metal transported from distant sources. The tavern relies on deliveries of food and drink. The market depends upon merchants. The merchants depend upon roads, rivers, and travelers willing to face uncertain journeys. The city appears permanent, but its prosperity is constantly being renewed through countless acts of movement, exchange, and cooperation. Every cart entering the gate contributes to a story much larger than itself. Every shipment becomes part of a network linking farms, villages, workshops, markets, and households into a single living system. Tomorrow morning, the gates will open again. Wagons will arrive. Merchants will negotiate. Workers will unload cargo. Customers will make purchases. Most residents will barely notice how much effort lies behind these ordinary moments. Yet the entire city depends upon them. The last traces of daylight have disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the city beneath a canopy of darkness broken only by scattered points of light shining through shutters, doorways, and smoke-darkened windows. From a distance, the city appears peaceful. The market square that bustled with customers throughout the day now sits mostly empty. The workshops that rang with hammers and echoed with conversation have fallen silent. Merchants have packed away their goods, apprentices have returned to their lodgings, and most travelers have finally found a place to rest after long journeys. The great surge of activity that carried the city from sunrise until evening seems to have faded away. Yet after spending an entire day exploring its streets, it becomes impossible to believe that the city has truly stopped. The silence itself is deceptive. Behind closed doors, preparations for tomorrow are already underway. A warm oven still glows in a bakery where work continues long after customers have gone home. Account books remain open on tables where merchants review figures by candlelight. In stables near the city gates, animals rest before another day of hauling goods across roads that stretch into the countryside. Along the waterfront, cargo waits patiently inside warehouses, ready to continue journeys that may have begun weeks or even months earlier. The city never reaches a point where absolutely nothing is happening. Activity simply becomes less visible. That hidden activity is easy to overlook because most residents encounter only the finished results. Bread appears on a market stall. A shipment arrives at a warehouse. A tavern receives fresh supplies. A customer purchases cloth, tools, or pottery without giving much thought to how those goods reached the city in the first place. The ordinary nature of these moments disguises the enormous amount of labor supporting them. A loaf of bread carries a history far longer than the few minutes required to buy it. Grain must be planted, cultivated, harvested, transported, milled, and prepared before it ever reaches an oven. Timber used by a carpenter may have spent years growing in a distant forest before becoming part of a piece of furniture. Cloth displayed by a merchant represents countless hours of work performed by people separated by distance, profession, and circumstance. Urban life gathers together the efforts of thousands and presents them in forms that appear surprisingly simple. Perhaps that is one of the most remarkable features of any successful city. Complexity hides beneath familiarity. The longer you spend observing medieval urban life, the more interconnected everything becomes. Workshops depend upon materials arriving from elsewhere. Markets depend upon workshops producing goods. Merchants depend upon transport networks linking different regions. Travelers depend upon inns and taverns. Religious institutions depend upon donations, labor, and resources supplied by the surrounding community. None of these systems exists independently. Each relies upon countless relationships that have developed over generations. Looking beyond the city walls, roads disappear into darkness. Somewhere beyond the horizon lie villages, farms, forests, rivers, and neighboring towns that help sustain the urban world you have spent the day exploring. The city may appear self-contained, but its prosperity is tied to a much larger landscape. Food, raw materials, information, and people move constantly between these places, creating connections that stretch far beyond what any resident can see from the top of a tower or from a stall in the marketplace. Even news follows these same pathways. Reports of distant events arrive with merchants and travelers. Information spreads through conversations held in taverns, workshops, churches, and market squares. Long before newspapers or modern communication systems, cities remained connected through the movement of people carrying stories, observations, rumors, and valuable knowledge gathered along the road. Many of the individuals responsible for keeping these connections alive passed through history without recognition. Chroniclers often focus on rulers, military campaigns, political disputes, and dramatic events because those subjects leave visible records behind. Yet the city itself is built upon quieter foundations. Its survival depends upon people willing to perform necessary work day after day, year after year, regardless of whether anyone records their names. Goods do not move on their own. Buildings do not repair themselves. Markets do not organize themselves. The routines supporting urban life require patience, skill, and persistence from thousands of ordinary individuals whose contributions rarely attract attention. That reality becomes easier to appreciate after walking through the city from morning until night. Every district reveals another layer of cooperation. The crowded market depends upon the surrounding countryside. The workshops depend upon deliveries arriving through the gates. The inns depend upon travelers. The merchants depend upon customers. The warehouses depend upon trade routes. The churches depend upon communities. Every part of the city supports another part. What appears chaotic at first gradually reveals its own form of order. The streets may be crowded. The buildings may be packed closely together. The noise may sometimes feel overwhelming. Yet beneath that apparent disorder exists a system refined through generations of experience. People learn where to buy goods, where to find work, whom to trust, and how to navigate the complicated relationships that make urban life possible. The city functions because its residents participate in a shared network of expectations, routines, and responsibilities that have developed slowly over time. The night deepens. One by one, lights disappear behind shutters. Conversations grow quieter. Fires burn lower. The sounds that remain are scattered and distant. A late traveler crosses a street on the way to an inn. A watchman continues a familiar patrol. Somewhere in the darkness a dog offers an unsolicited opinion regarding matters known only to itself. Above the rooftops, the same stars shine over roads, villages, rivers, and distant towns connected to the city through trade and travel. Beneath those stars, countless people prepare for another day that will look remarkably similar to the one that has just ended. Shops will open. Goods will arrive. Customers will negotiate prices. Apprentices will begin work. Wagons will pass through the gates. Bells will ring across the rooftops. The entire cycle will begin again. For now, however, the city enjoys a brief pause between one busy day and the next. The markets are empty. The workshops are quiet. The roads beyond the walls have faded into darkness. Yet beneath that calm exterior remains the same intricate web of labor, commerce, cooperation, and routine that has sustained urban life for generations. And as sleep slowly settles across homes, inns, and narrow streets alike, the medieval city waits patiently for dawn, ready to continue the endless story of the people whose ordinary work keeps extraordinary communities alive. Now you find yourself traveling far beyond the stone cathedrals, gilded icons, and ringing church bells that would one day become familiar across the lands of Kievan Rus. You journey backward through centuries until the roads disappear beneath forests, until the boundaries between the human world and the unseen world seem almost impossible to distinguish. The landscape around you belongs to an age when ancient gods still occupied the imagination of the people, when rivers possessed personalities, when forests concealed mysteries, and when every flash of lightning across the sky could carry divine meaning. The darkness of night is only beginning to loosen its hold upon the land as you make your way along a narrow path worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The ground beneath your feet is damp from the cool breath of the night, and a pale mist drifts low across the earth, gathering among the roots of trees and settling quietly over the sleeping fields. Ahead, beyond a cluster of wooden homes resting beside a broad river, a faint silver glow spreads slowly across the horizon. No bell announces the coming day. No tower rises above the settlement. The morning arrives gently, as it always has, carried on the scent of wet soil, wood smoke, and flowing water. A fisherman is already awake. You notice him moving toward the riverbank, carrying a bundle of nets over one shoulder while the village behind him remains wrapped in silence. His footsteps make little sound against the damp ground. He pauses for a moment before reaching the water, gazing across the current as though listening for something hidden within its steady murmur. The river flows endlessly through these lands, linking distant settlements separated by vast forests and marshes, and there are people here who say that rivers remember. They remember storms long forgotten by men. They remember villages that no longer stand. They remember the bones of ancestors resting beneath their banks. The fisherman kneels beside his boat and touches the water briefly before pushing away from shore. Whether it is habit, respect, or something older, you cannot say. In this world the difference is often difficult to recognize. Customs blend so naturally into daily life that few people stop to explain them. They simply do what their parents did, and what their grandparents did before them, because the world has always seemed larger and stranger than any one person can fully understand. As the sky brightens, thin threads of smoke begin rising from the rooftops nearby. One by one the houses awaken. A woman emerges carrying a wooden pail. An elderly man opens a gate and releases a pair of goats into a small enclosure. Somewhere a child laughs briefly before being called back indoors. The sounds are ordinary enough, yet they unfold within a landscape that feels alive in ways difficult to describe. The trees standing beyond the village do not appear to be mere trees. The shadows beneath their branches seem deeper than they should. The wind moving through their leaves creates whispers that draw the imagination toward thoughts of hidden presences watching from the forest edge. Nobody here finds such thoughts unusual. The world has always been filled with things unseen. A sudden gust of wind crossing an open field may carry meaning. A strange dream might deserve careful consideration. An unexpected crack of thunder on a clear afternoon can become the subject of conversation for days. The boundary separating the visible world from the invisible one feels remarkably thin, as though both exist side by side, touching one another constantly without ever fully merging. The sun finally lifts above the horizon, spreading pale gold across the river. The mist begins to dissolve. Droplets of dew sparkle upon tall grass. The settlement grows busier with each passing moment. Voices drift through the morning air. Axes strike wood in the distance. Dogs bark. Wheels creak. Life unfolds exactly as it did yesterday and exactly as it will tomorrow, yet beneath every task runs a quiet awareness that human beings are not alone within creation. The forests were here before them. The rivers were here before them. The powers governing storms, harvests, winter snows, and summer rains existed long before any living person first opened their eyes to this world. The warmth of the rising sun spreads gradually across the countryside, touching first the tops of the trees before reaching the fields below. Shadows withdraw from the open ground and gather beneath fences, wagons, and barns. The scent of fresh bread begins drifting from several homes. Somewhere nearby, grain is being ground between stones. A rooster calls again, as though determined to remind everyone that another day has begun. You continue along the edge of the settlement, passing houses built from timber cut from nearby forests. Their walls are sturdy but simple. Smoke escapes through openings in the roofs. Stacks of firewood stand neatly arranged beside doorways in preparation for colder months that will inevitably return. Nothing here is built with permanence in mind. The people understand that wood decays, roofs leak, storms arrive, and winters test every structure. Life is not about conquering nature. It is about living within it. An elderly woman sits outside her home repairing a wool garment. Her hands move with the confidence of long experience. Beside her rests a small bowl containing pieces of bread. Before beginning her work, she tears off a fragment and places it carefully near the edge of the yard. No announcement accompanies the gesture. No explanation follows. She simply returns to her sewing. Yet such small actions reveal much about the world around you. The people of Kievan Rus do not believe themselves isolated from the forces that surround them. Gratitude, respect, and caution weave quietly through everyday life. A harvest, a healthy child, a successful hunt, safe travel along a river, all are blessings that cannot be taken for granted. The world provides generously, but it can also become harsh without warning. By midday the fields beyond the village are alive with activity. Farmers move through rows of crops beneath a sky of deepening blue. The earth is dark and fertile. Birds circle overhead. Insects hum among patches of wildflowers growing along the edges of cultivated land. Looking across the countryside, it becomes clear how dependent these communities are upon the turning of the seasons. A year of favorable weather brings abundance. A year of poor weather brings hardship. There are no distant warehouses waiting to solve a failed harvest. There are no machines to compensate for drought or flood. The success of an entire community rests upon forces that remain beyond human control. Perhaps that is why the sky commands such attention. Even now, while the day remains bright and calm, people glance upward from time to time. Clouds matter. Winds matter. Rain matters. The heavens influence every aspect of life below. As the afternoon passes, the forest bordering the settlement seems to draw closer. From a distance its trees appear peaceful enough, standing motionless beneath sunlight. Yet the closer you approach, the more mysterious it becomes. The temperature cools beneath the canopy. The sounds of the village fade behind you. Moss softens the ground. Sunlight filters through branches in narrow shafts that illuminate patches of fern and wild mushrooms. It is easy to understand why stories flourish here. The forest feels ancient. Older than memory. Older than any village. Older than any prince whose name survives in song. Many people enter these woods seeking game, firewood, or berries. Few enter without respect. Certain clearings are spoken of carefully. Certain trees are remembered long after others fall. Certain springs possess reputations that have survived for generations. Whether every tale is believed literally hardly matters. What matters is that the forest inspires wonder, and wonder naturally invites stories. The hours drift by. The sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon. Farmers gather tools. Herds are guided back toward enclosures. Boats return from the river carrying fish caught during the day. Smoke rises once more from household fires as evening meals are prepared. A golden light settles across the landscape. The river reflects the colors of the sky. The village grows quieter. People return home. Children finish their games. Voices soften. The day gradually releases its hold upon the world. And as darkness begins returning to the forests and fields of Kievan Rus, the old stories begin awakening once more, carried from one generation to another beside glowing hearths and flickering fires, preserving the memory of gods whose presence still lingers in every river, every storm cloud, and every whispering tree. The last traces of daylight have disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving behind a faint glow that lingers briefly above the western forests before surrendering completely to the approaching night. Across the settlement, the familiar sounds of labor and movement gradually fade into the background, replaced by quieter rhythms that belong only to the evening. The broad river continues its endless journey through the landscape, reflecting the first stars appearing overhead, while a thin veil of mist drifts across the water and gathers among the reeds lining the shore. From where you stand near the edge of the village, the world seems to slow itself, as though the land is taking a long breath after spending the day beneath the watchful eye of the sun. Warm light flickers through the narrow openings of timber houses scattered along the riverbank, and the scent of wood smoke rises gently into the cooling air. Families gather around their hearths, sharing simple meals prepared from the work of the day, while children listen to conversations they have heard many times before yet never seem to tire of. Beyond the houses, darkness settles over the fields where crops stand motionless beneath the stars, and farther still, the great forest stretches across the horizon like an ancient sea of shadows. During daylight its paths seem familiar enough, but now, beneath the moonlight, the woodland appears older and more mysterious, as though it belongs to a different world entirely. Looking upward, you find the sky almost impossible to ignore. Without towers, without cities, and without the countless lights that will one day fill the night, the heavens reveal themselves in extraordinary detail. Thousands of stars shine above the countryside, forming patterns that generations have studied and remembered. Their light reaches the earth from distances no one can imagine, and yet to the people gathered beside these rivers and forests, the stars feel close enough to influence the world below. The heavens are not distant. They are active. Clouds emerge from them. Rain falls from them. Lightning flashes across them. Every season arrives beneath their gaze. Perhaps that is why the people of Kievan Rus often lift their eyes toward the sky when speaking about the powers that shape their lives. A successful harvest begins there. A drought begins there. A storm capable of flattening crops and splintering trees begins there. The sky possesses an authority that no prince, merchant, or warrior can challenge, and among the many divine beings remembered in stories told beside village fires, none is more closely connected to that authority than Purin. His presence is not introduced with temples dominating the landscape or armies marching beneath sacred banners. Instead, it reveals itself gradually through the way people interpret the world around them. A distant rumble of thunder rolling across the horizon is never merely a sound. A lightning strike splitting an oak tree during a summer storm is never dismissed as chance. Even on calm evenings such as this one, when the air remains still and the stars shine brightly overhead, there exists an awareness that the heavens can change without warning. The peaceful sky visible now may, by tomorrow, become a battlefield of cloud, wind, rain, and fire. As the evening continues, several villagers remain gathered beside a communal fire near the center of the settlement. The flames cast a warm circle of light across the ground while darkness presses gently against its edges. An elder speaks quietly, not because the listeners need help hearing him, but because stories seem more powerful when delivered softly. The younger children lean closer whenever his voice drops, while the adults pretend to focus on other things even as they listen to every word. He speaks of a time so distant that no living person could possibly remember it, a time when the world was shaped by forces larger than humanity. His words drift into the night air, blending with the crackle of burning wood and the murmur of the river beyond the houses. Nobody interrupts. Nobody rushes him. Stories are not treated as distractions from life here. They are part of life itself, carrying knowledge, memory, and meaning from one generation to the next. As he speaks, your attention drifts toward the western horizon, where a small cluster of clouds has begun gathering above the forest. They are still distant enough to appear harmless, little more than dark smudges against the stars, yet they seem strangely deliberate in their movement. The sky remains clear overhead, but the clouds continue growing as though drawn together by an invisible hand. A cool breeze arrives from the west and moves through the village, stirring leaves and carrying with it the faint scent of approaching rain. The elder notices the clouds as well, though he gives no sign of concern. Instead, he continues speaking about Purin as naturally as someone discussing an old acquaintance. In the stories handed down through generations, Purin is not simply a god of thunder. He represents strength, protection, authority, and the power that maintains order within the world. His weapon flashes across the heavens as lightning. His voice echoes through the sky as thunder. His presence is felt whenever storms sweep across the countryside, reminding humanity that there are forces greater than any earthly ruler. The clouds continue gathering while he speaks. One by one, stars vanish behind them. The breeze strengthens slightly, enough to send ripples across the river and cause nearby branches to sway. The listeners glance occasionally toward the horizon, though none seem eager to leave. Storms are familiar companions in these lands. They arrive every year. They nourish crops, fill rivers, and occasionally remind entire communities how fragile human plans can be. The elder's story unfolds slowly, following the rhythm of the night itself. He speaks of ancient struggles reflected in every storm cloud that crosses the sky. He speaks of powers dwelling above the world and powers moving beneath it. He speaks of conflicts older than memory, conflicts that continue whenever thunder rolls across the heavens. The listeners know many of these tales already, yet familiarity does not diminish their power. If anything, hearing them while watching clouds gather beyond the forest makes them feel more real. A flash appears in the distance. It is brief. So brief that for a moment you wonder whether you imagined it. Several heartbeats pass before a low rumble reaches the village. The sound is faint, but unmistakable. Far beyond the horizon, a storm has awakened. Far beyond the horizon, a storm has awakened, though from where you stand beside the fading fire its presence is known less through sight than through subtle changes spreading across the landscape. The air feels different now, carrying a coolness that was absent earlier in the evening, and the breeze moving in from the west seems to travel with a purpose of its own as it passes through the village, stirring leaves, bending tall grasses near the riverbank, and sending faint ripples across water that only a short while ago reflected the stars with perfect clarity. The clouds responsible for this transformation remain distant enough that much of the sky overhead still glitters with starlight, yet their slow advance is impossible to ignore, and as you continue watching the dark outline of the forest stretching along the horizon, it becomes increasingly clear that the peaceful night settling over the countryside will not remain unchanged for long. The people gathered near the fire appear to sense the same thing, though no one speaks of it directly. There is no urgency in their movements and no sign of concern upon their faces, only the quiet awareness that comes from spending a lifetime beneath open skies where weather often announces itself long before it arrives. Such awareness is learned early in these lands. A child who grows up beside these rivers soon learns how to read the movement of clouds, how to recognize the scent of approaching rain carried upon the wind, and how to notice the subtle shifts in light and air that often precede a summer storm. Long before written calendars become common and long before instruments are invented to measure the atmosphere, observation serves as a form of knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next. As the evening deepens and the darkness settles more completely across the fields beyond the settlement, the conversation around the fire gradually gives way to longer moments of silence, not because anyone wishes to end the gathering but because the world surrounding them has become increasingly captivating. The river continues its steady movement through the night, unseen in places where mist has gathered above its surface, while the forest beyond remains a vast wall of shadow whose countless trees merge together beneath the moonlight. Looking toward it now, it is easy to imagine why so many stories emerged from these landscapes. The imagination requires very little encouragement in a place where ancient woodlands seem to stretch forever and where every distant sound appears to come from somewhere just beyond sight. For the people of Kievan Rus, the natural world does not exist as a backdrop to human life. It exists alongside it, participating in every season and every struggle, shaping fortunes and determining possibilities in ways both obvious and subtle. The harvest depends upon rain arriving at the proper time. Rivers determine which settlements prosper and which remain isolated. Forests provide warmth during winter and materials for homes, tools, and boats. Even the wind influences daily existence, carrying storms across great distances and connecting regions separated by hundreds of miles. Living within such a world encourages a certain humility, because no matter how skilled a farmer becomes or how wealthy a merchant grows, there remain forces operating beyond human control, forces that reveal themselves most clearly when the sky begins to change and the first signs of a storm appear upon the horizon. The rain that began as a quiet presence beyond the edge of the village has now started to move closer, not arriving all at once but unfolding gradually across the landscape as though the night itself is shifting its weight from one horizon to another. The air grows steadily cooler, and the scent of wet earth strengthens with each passing moment, rising from the fields where crops stand dark and still beneath the approaching storm. Around the settlement, the familiar boundary between land and sky begins to blur, as distant flashes illuminate the western horizon in brief, silent bursts that reveal the vast shape of clouds rolling forward like an unseen tide. From the fire where you remain seated, the warmth that once felt steady now seems more fragile against the expanding chill carried by the wind. The flames still burn, but their light no longer defines the world beyond them as clearly as before. Shadows stretch further into the village, slipping between houses and along pathways where only moments earlier the darkness felt distant. Even the river, which has remained a constant presence throughout the day and into the night, begins to change its character, its surface no longer reflecting stars with clarity but instead breaking them into scattered fragments whenever the wind touches it. No one speaks much now, not because there is anything to fear in what is coming, but because attention has naturally shifted outward, toward the slow transformation unfolding across the sky. In these lands, storms are never sudden intrusions but gradual arrivals that announce themselves through 1,000 small signs long before the first heavy rain reaches the ground. People recognize these signs without needing instruction. A change in the direction of wind. A deepening of color along the horizon. A faint pressure in the air that seems to settle upon everything at once. These are not unusual occurrences. They are familiar patterns, learned through years of living closely with the rhythms of the natural world. The elder beside the fire remains seated, though his voice has softened further, blending now with the distant movement of wind through the village and the low, growing sound of thunder that no longer feels far away. He continues speaking as though the storm itself has become part of the gathering, as though the heavens are not separate from the stories being told but participating within them. His words drift through descriptions of ancient power and forgotten struggle, yet they no longer feel distant or symbolic, because the sky above him responds in kind, as though every phrase spoken beneath it finds an echo within the clouds. The western horizon has now lost nearly all remaining clarity, replaced by layered darkness that shifts and deepens with each passing minute. Occasional flashes reveal the structure of the storm more clearly, showing towering formations of cloud that rise far above the forest line and stretch outward beyond what can be seen. Between those brief illuminations, everything returns to shadow, and the sense of scale becomes difficult to grasp, as though the night itself has expanded far beyond its usual boundaries. Within the village, movement becomes slower but more deliberate. Doors are secured without haste. Objects left outside during the day are brought indoors. Animals respond instinctively to the changing air, gathering closer to shelters and low structures. Yet even in these preparations there is no urgency, only the quiet understanding that the world is entering a familiar phase, one that has come many times before and will come again in the future. Life here has always been shaped by such cycles, where calm and storm follow one another without conflict, each giving meaning to the other. Another flash spreads across the horizon, brighter than those before it, and for a brief moment the entire landscape is revealed in stark clarity, from the far edge of the forest to the river winding through the valley and the scattered roofs of the village clustered along its bank. In that instant the world appears almost suspended, as though time itself has paused to allow the storm to reveal its full presence before darkness returns and the next wave of thunder rolls across the land. The sound arrives not as a single but as a long, resonant movement through the air, traveling across distance and settling deep within the earth before fading slowly into silence again. It is in such moments that the stories told beside fires gain their deepest strength, because the boundary between memory and experience becomes thin enough that both seem to occupy the same space. The storm moving across the sky is not separate from the tales of ancient power, it feels instead like their continuation, written once again in light and sound across the heavens. Even those who do not speak of gods directly still feel the presence of something greater than human scale, something expressed not through words but through wind, rain, and the vast movement of cloud across night. The first steady rain finally arrives, not in force but in widening patterns that spread across the village like a soft curtain descending upon the world. It touches rooftops, fields, and river alike, transforming each surface in subtle ways as sound replaces silence and the rhythm of falling water becomes the dominant presence within the night. The fire continues to burn, though now its light is surrounded by the shifting texture of rain, and the village exists within a space where earth, sky, and water seem to merge into a single continuous motion. And as the storm settles fully over the lands of Kievan Rus, moving across forests older than memory and rivers that have carried countless generations toward distant seas, the night itself becomes something larger than darkness alone, carrying within it the weight of stories, beliefs, and unseen presences that have shaped the way people understand the world they inhabit, as though every drop of rain falling from the sky is part of a vast, living rhythm that connects earth and heavens in an endless, moving circle. The rain that has fully settled over the lands of Kievan Rus now moves across the village in steady, unbroken rhythms, touching rooftops, fields, and river alike as though the entire landscape has been drawn into a single continuous breath shared between earth and sky. The fire beside which you remain seated still burns, though its shape has changed under the influence of wind and moisture, leaning inward as sparks vanish into the darkness beyond the circle of light. Around it, the village no longer feels like a collection of separate homes and paths but instead like a single living presence enduring the passing storm together, each structure and each life bound to the same shifting atmosphere that surrounds them. Beyond the glow of the flames, the forest has disappeared almost entirely, replaced by a moving wall of shadow that only reveals itself in fragments whenever distant lightning tears briefly across the horizon. In those fleeting moments, the trees appear not as individual forms but as vast, interconnected depths stretching far beyond human perception, their silhouettes rising and merging with the clouds above them as though the boundary between land and sky has dissolved completely. The river, once reflecting stars and moonlight with quiet clarity, now carries only broken patterns of light and darkness, its surface responding constantly to wind and rain without ever ceasing its forward motion. Within the village, there is no sense of disruption, only adaptation, as if every movement of the storm is already understood through memory rather than surprise. Doors remain closed, yet behind them life continues with the same steady rhythm it always has. The sound of rain against wood, earth, and water becomes the dominant language of the night, replacing conversation and thought alike, filling every space between houses and fields with its unending presence. Even the fire, though still alive, feels less like a center of gathering and more like a quiet resistance against the larger world pressing in from all sides.
The story spoken earlier beside the flames now seem to linger within the air itself, no longer belonging solely to the voice of the elder but spreading outward into the storm, carried through wind and water as though the night itself continues the telling. The idea of forces moving through the heavens, shaping weather, influencing harvests, and passing judgment through thunder, no longer feels confined to speech or imagination. It exists instead as part of the atmosphere surrounding the village, woven into the experience of standing beneath a sky that never feels empty, even when unseen. At times, when the lightning returns, the world is revealed in sudden clarity, not softened by distance or darkness but exposed in sharp and immediate detail. The river appears briefly as a silver path cutting through the valley. The fields emerge as dark, textured surfaces holding the weight of rain. The village becomes a cluster of fragile forms gathered against the vastness of surrounding land.
And then, just as quickly, everything disappears again, swallowed by night until only the sound of falling water remains to mark the passage of time. In such moments, it becomes easy to understand how earlier generations might have interpreted the storm not simply as weather but as presence, not as random movement of air and water but as expression of will beyond human scale. The thunder that rolls across the landscape carries depth that seems greater than sound alone, as if it originates not from a single point in the sky but from the entire expanse above, resonating through cloud, forest, and earth at once. The rain that follows feels less like descent and more like continuation of that same vast motion, as though the sky is not empty space but a living structure in constant change. The village endures beneath it all without resistance, shaped by long familiarity with such nights. There is no attempt to separate life from storm, no effort to escape or silence what cannot be controlled. Instead, everything continues within it, as though human existence here has always been designed to move in rhythm with these cycles of sky and season. Fires are maintained. Shelters hold. Rivers continue flowing. And beyond them, forests stand as they always have, absorbing wind and rain without complaint, growing and decaying in patterns that stretch far beyond any single human life. As the night progresses, the storm begins to shift gradually, not through sudden departure but through slow transformation, its intensity spreading across wider distances while its center moves beyond the immediate horizon. The rain remains, but the sharpness of lightning becomes less frequent, and the thunder loses some of its earlier force as it travels farther across the land. Yet even as it recedes, its presence lingers in every surface it has touched, in the softened ground, the heavier air, and the deeper quiet that follows each passing wave of sound. The fire beside you persists through this change, smaller now but still steady, its light reflecting faintly off wet ground and damp wood. Around it, figures begin to settle more deeply into stillness, no longer watching the storm with the same intensity but instead allowing it to pass as all storms eventually do. The sense remains, however, that nothing has truly ended, only shifted into another phase, as though the movement of the sky continues beyond what can be seen or heard, extending far into the unseen reaches of the world. And as the rain continues its gradual descent across the forests, rivers, and settlements of Kievan Rus, the night carries forward its endless continuity, where every storm becomes part of a larger cycle of earth and heavens moving together without beginning or conclusion, shaping not only the land itself but also the way those who live upon it understand their place within a world that is always in motion, always breathing, and always alive beneath the unseen weight of forgotten powers.